Our service is about to begin. I would ask if you have a cellular device to please turn it to the off position. Officiating our service today will be Rabbi Misha Tillman.
A long time ago, to be more precise, more than 30 years ago, so really long time ago, when I was a young man studying at the Rabbinical Academy, I had a teacher. So just imagine this. He got his PhD during World War I. He was a very old guy, really old. He was an historian. Dr. Jacob Rader Marcus was his name. Dr. Marcus actually wrote the very first book on the history of the American Jews. So he single-handedly founded the entire field of historical studies. And as I mentioned, he was an old man. He lived to be almost 100. He fell a couple of weeks short of that remarkable landmark. I was the last class that he taught. He was 98 and a half at the time, but very sharp, and no filter. I'm not going to quote him on that part, but yeah, like old men, you know what I mean, right? So one time, we were discussing funerals, and Dr. Marcus told me something that I found to be astounding. As I said, I was a young man, and young people usually perceive death very dramatically. Younger people are sensitive to this phenomenon of death. And he said something that, as I said, was just almost shocking. He said, Michael, he was from West Virginia, Michael, remember, y'all better remember, 5 minutes, that'll be enough to say everything important about anybody. I was like, again, I was young. We're talking about a landmark in one's life, a life-changing event, and he's talking about 5 minutes. But when I started practicing as a rabbi, I realized that he actually knew what he was talking about. So 5 years after that conversation, I was already up here in Chicago. In fact, not very far from here, I was sitting with the family that lost their father. Right by Skokie Swift is their house, 2 sons. And I quoted my teacher. And one of the sons said, but, Rabbi, but this is so sad. I said, what's so sad? He said, the entire life, the whole human life in 5 minutes. And I replied without even thinking. It just came out by itself. I said, okay, what good is a book if you cannot tell me in 5 minutes what that book is about? See, life is a book. Life is a book. Like any book, it has the beginning. Like any book, it has the ending. And what do we have in between? Well, we have all kinds of things. We have good things and we have painful things, such as the nature of human existence. But what matters is, and our duty is, to make sure that every event that we're experiencing in our lives, we make it meaningful. We make it matter. And that's what makes the ritual of saying farewell to people whom we love and respect so profound. It is not that pain of loss, which undoubtedly, of course, Sarah, Tom, and Hannah experienced today, and we're here to support you, my dear friends, yes. But this is temporal and temporary. The pain of loss will go away with the passage of time. It's normal. But that's not the most important part. The most important part is Sopha's book of life, the book that she has written for us, because that cannot be taken away. The good deeds that she performed in this world, they already changed the world for the better. They cannot be undone. And most importantly, love that she gave you, friendships that she shared with you. Because love and friendship, those things, they transcend the boundaries of space and time. They cannot be withdrawn or taken away from us. So this is the reason not for mourning, but the reason for rejoicing and celebration of life that was lived so well and so meaningfully. But again, I'm far from suggesting it was an easy life. That doesn't exist. But what matters is the meaning. 3,000 years ago, King Solomon, at least that's what our tradition says, King Solomon wrote a book. The book is called Kohelet in Hebrew. In English, it's called Ecclesiastes. The one who preaches in the gatherings comes from Greek, that English name. English title. As a matter of fact, yesterday in the synagogue, as is prescribed for the holiday of Sukkot, we read that book in the synagogue, all 12 chapters. So it was a very long affair. But this book is very profound. Many rabbis actually questioned the validity of its inclusion into the canon because it's so different from everything else in the biblical literature. It's not pious. It's even somewhat cynical. Because it doesn't discuss God or God and human being. It discusses pretty much what it is like to be a human being, to live in this world. That is what Solomon discusses. That is what Solomon reflects upon. And chapter 3 contains a very, very famous discourse, very famous reflection, and you will recognize the opening verses even if you never read the book of Ecclesiastes. I will read it first in Hebrew and then share with you the English interpretation. לכל זמן ועת לכל חפץ תחת השמיים, עת לרדת ועת למות, עת לטעת ועת לקור נטוע, עת לפרוץ ועת לבנות, עת לבכות ועת לשחוק, עת צפות ועת רקוד, עת להשליך אבנים ועת כנוס אבנים, עת לחבוק ועת לרחוק מהבק, עת לבקש ועת לאבד, עת לשמור ועת להשליך, עת לקרוא ועת לתפור, עת לחשות ועת לדבר. For everything there is a season and a time for every experience under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to discard. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. It is a time to speak. It is a time to reflect on the book that Sofya has written for us, on the book of her life. So here come 5 minutes. I have to tell you in advance that in all likelihood, I will go way beyond that because I'm a rabbi. Rabbis talk forever. But all the same, okay, this will be 5 rabbinical minutes then, okay? Now, Sofya belongs to that generation of our people that we used to call in the Soviet Union Deti Vayny, children of the war. Because their young years, their formative years and their childhood coincided with the most tragic and most trying period of our history. And I mean the Soviet history and the Russian Jewish history. It's the period of World War II, or as we call it, Great Patriotic War back then, because there were many tragedies, many losses, and people who even survived lived in extremely dangerous condition, malnutrition, malnourishment, terrible illnesses, and so on and so forth. The reason I'm mentioning that is not for us to feel sorry for Sofya. I mean, that entire generation went through that. But we must understand what influenced their system of values, how the values emerged, and those trials and tribulations of the early years convinced of what truly matters in this world, what matters less, and how to make sure that one does live a good and meaningful life. And I will elaborate on these ideas a little bit more. So she was born in Leningrad. Now it's called St. Petersburg. And before that, it was called St. Petersburg, too. So this is a big city that keeps on changing its names. 4 times, I think, at least, it changed the names. Now, Leningrad is a city that stands out among any other place in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, and now in Russia, because arguably it's the only European city in culture. Everything else is really Russia. Leningrad is, well, it's Russian-speaking, of course, it's Russia, but it's very European. And residents of Leningrad take pride in that, take pride in their distinct culture. Sofya was part of that Leningrad culture. Needless to say, she was about 6 years of age when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. They managed to evacuate. Let me just mention in passing that Leningrad and the population of that city suffered tremendously, more than everybody else, really, during that war, because Leningrad was in blockade. People died of starvation, and of course the cold winter. It was terrible. The civil population suffered tremendous losses. They were lucky enough to evacuate from the besieged city and return home after after the city was liberated. So Sofya grew up in Leningrad. She was a very talented, very brilliant young lady. Well, she remained brilliant through the rest of her life, but she possessed a tremendous intellect, and she became a chemist. And not just she became a chemist, she also earned her PhD, кандидат химических наук, PhD in chemistry. It is in Leningrad that she met her beloved husband, Ilya. Well, obviously they got married. As I said, he was a husband, so they got married quite obviously, and were blessed with a wonderful daughter, Sarah. That wasn't her Russian name, but but she's Sarah for us here in America. And then came the next big landmark, which also was not an easy one, my friends. In the 1970s, because of various factors, the overall atmosphere towards attitude towards the Jewish people in the late stage Soviet Union, the standard of living, in general, kind of a bleak lifestyle, if I may say so, moved many people to consider leaving the country. Now, back then, let me remind you, the times were very different. There was no internet, much less TikTok, right? We were all living behind the Iron Curtain, regardless where you were back then. And let me just say this. Sarah may not remember that, must have been too young, but the Soviet propaganda, they knew that some people want to leave. And they would tell us, if you want to go to America, you're going to be sleeping on the benches. You're going to be homeless. You're going to live miserable life. Because they try to scare people out of immigration to the United States because people sought a better life. They say, no, there will be no better life there. So what I'm saying is that for people who made that decision, it was actually very brave. It was a gamble, if you will. There was hardly any information what it is like in the United States, really. All the information we got was from the Soviet news, which was anti-American propaganda, really. So Sofya's and Ilya's decision, and other families who left in the late 70s, early 80s, it was just really an act of bravery and valor, without any exaggeration. For us who left early, like 1990, we knew what was going on. We knew where we were going. They didn't. Now, it proved to be the right decision. And what motivated them was not only their own future, Sofya's and Ilya's future, they were still young and wanted to build a new career, but most importantly, Sarah's future. They wanted Sarah to have better opportunities than they had when they were young in the Soviet Union. And in 1980, they moved to the United States. They moved to Chicago. And again, it proved to be the right decision. The family was happy here. Now, let me also mention that immigration is not just moving. It's much more than that. And it will be an understatement to say that first few years of immigration, and those of us who went through that experience as adults, those first 2 years are extremely difficult. They're psychologically frustrating. It's just a different culture. I'm not even talking about the language, just the culture different. Okay, American eat dessert with a fork, Russians with a teaspoon. Okay, even such small things, I mean, it's hard. But again, they made that effort. They made their life here in the United States, and Sofya enjoyed a very successful career here. She worked at the University of Chicago in the lab as a chemist, and then for more than 20 years, if Sarah is not mistaken in her recount of the events, she worked for G.D. Searle, for the company. And again, she, as I said, she built a wonderful career here. Then eventually came the time of retirement, and Sofya and Ilya moved down to Florida, which was a very welcome change in the climate in which they lived, because prior to that, they lived in Leningrad and in Chicago, and both cities stand out for their miserable climate. Don't think I'm joking, trust me. Leningrad is even worse than Chicago, if you can imagine that. It's like Chicago plus Detroit in climate. Really bad. Really, really bad. Great city, but the climate is just... be it as it may, the years in Florida were wonderful, of course, until Ilya departed. May his memory be a blessing. And then, Sofya came back up to Chicago to be with the family. Now, one thing that I would say about Sofya, one thing that defined her, she was part of what we call in the Russian language intelligentsia. In English, it is rendered by the word intelligentsia, but such term doesn't really exist in the English-speaking culture. The closest to that is intellectual, somebody who knows a lot. But in the Russian culture, it came from the Italian word into the Russian culture. It is somebody who is not just knowledgeable in many fields, but someone who also follows a certain system of values. I must say that good as the American education is, Soviet education was actually great. There are many bad things about the Soviet Union, trust me. I'm far from looking at the rosy glasses, but the Soviet education was excellent because they trained people not only in their narrow field, but also encouraged them to become interested in all kinds of things that were beyond their profession. That's what the intelligent person is. So Sofya wasn't just an excellent chemist. She was also a lover of music and classical music, opera, theater. Actually, well, in that regard, they were pretty lucky. Leningrad has a fantastic scene in that regard, always did and still does. But Chicago is also a great place for that, right? Chicago Symphony, I mean, it's world class. There's no question about that. And she enjoyed, but not just enjoyed. She was knowledgeable about that too. She loved art. Once again, Leningrad is very artsy city. So she loved art, museums, and Chicago also has wonderful museums as well. Very important part of her life was literature. It's not by chance I decided to talk about the book of life. Well, literally, she read books, not just posts on Twitter or on X, right? She read books, actual books, right? A good example for us. We shouldn't forget that. She could read in English. She could read in Russian, but primarily she read in Russian, really. All the same, book is great. Book is much better than a movie, because if you read a book, if you read a novel, you're basically making your own movie in your mind. So read books, my friends. That's what Sofya did. Another important aspect of her being, a person, what we call intelligentsia, was rejoicing in the beauty of the world. This brings me back to the Soviet lifestyle, if you will, behind the Iron Curtain. We in the Soviet Union were not allowed to travel to foreign countries. We couldn't travel abroad, much less to the countries that were capitalist, as they call them then. So when we ended up, here in the West, we immediately seized that opportunity to fulfill the dreams that we thought would never be realized if we stayed back then. So Ilya and Sofya just immersed themselves in traveling and seeing the beauty of the world, seeing the cultural sites. Russians love to travel to Europe. It's a big thing, because in Russia, we always grew up, admiring European culture, so they definitely went to Europe, all over it. But of course, they definitely partook of the American classic. Caribbean, Mexico, Canada, and so on and so forth. Russians, old school Russians, now it's different there too. But Russians have this interesting element of their culture. In the old days, Russians didn't really go out, but they went в гости. In other words, they visited each other. Instead of going out to the restaurant together, they would go to each other's houses and gather there. That was a preferred way of spending time, not only because restaurants were too expensive for them, but also because this creates a more intimacy, it's a more bonding experience. And also they would do all kinds of things that, again, are cultural in nature. So Sarah recalled that they would gather together, friends, and Ilya's and Sofya's friends, and they would recite poetry, right? So there's no DJ, no dance. No, they recited poetry, and this is truly beautiful and touching. Sofya was an old school lady, and therefore, like all women of old school, she actually did cook, in big contrast to ladies of other generations. No criticism. Life changes. I'm not saying this, but when mama or babushka cooks, it's different. It's better than the restaurant. And needless to say, she was a good cook. A couple of dishes that she was particular when, of course, was her salmon. She was known for that. And she made this Russian-style beet salad, which turned out that both Sarah's and my family had that as kind of a signature salad of our mothers. So what you do is you take beets, you cooked beets, of course, you grate them, you press a lot of garlic there, it's a Russian cuisine, what do you expect? A lot of garlic. Chopped walnuts and mayonnaise. So so it's very nutritious, I'm telling you. You're not going to lose weight if you eat that. But it tastes mighty good, I'm telling you. After you told me that, I went out and bought all the ingredients, and I kid you not, because I haven't had it in a while. I can make it. So this was Sofya was a person who was most and foremost very giving. Because everything I mentioned, it's all not only just about receiving the best that the humankind accumulated as a treasury of culture and art, but sharing with others and giving. Her intellect, her high level of culture, her love, most importantly. That's what defined Sofya. Yet, I also must add that she was a person who possessed, shall I put it, strength of spirit. How about that? Right. In other words, she persevered in her opinions. She took a stand, and you can't move her. She was there, stood her ground. Again, this is typical for that generation of the Russian ladies. My mom just a few years, younger than Sofya, but so same story. But you got to understand, this is part of that generational trait. But also, I always say that in order for life to be meaningful, we only need two things: love is one, and strength of spirit is another. In this world, you must be strong, and strong she was. Now, as I said, family was the most important thing in Sofya's life. She had a sister, Raya, may memory be a blessing. She was a loving sister. Ilya passed away 10 years ago, I bet, right? 10 years ago. But they're married for 50 years. 50 years. And God blessed her with the only child, a wonderful daughter, Sarah. And as the mother, she made sure that Sarah grew up to be a good person. Because this is the mission of every parent. When we raise our kids, and they have a good career, and they're smart and all that, we're proud of them, that's great. But my mission as a parent is fulfilled only when the moment arrives and I can say to myself, my daughter grew up to be a good person. That's when I'm done. She has fulfilled her mission. She was rightfully proud of Sarah. And Sarah's married to Tom, who was also very dear to Sofya's heart. And she was blessed with a wonderful granddaughter, Hannah. We'll always cherish her grandma's memory and will be worthy of her legacy. And we'll honor her memory through your successes in school, later on in college, in profession. Got to get a PhD too, right? You better get one. Your grandma was a PhD. Better be worthy. Yeah, I'm raising that bar just to stimulate you a little bit, right? Give you incentive. But all the same, most importantly, she will become a noble, good human being, just like her grandma was. So, my friends, now let us continue reflecting on Sofya's book of life through Sarah's thoughts and reminiscences. She's going to share her memories of her beloved mama with us.
Okay. So, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming and for remembering my mom and just celebrating the person that she was. So, thank you. All week I was planning for the service, and everything else was fairly straightforward to do, like checkbox activity, and me being a project manager, that was pretty straightforward. But the one thing I struggled with was what to say. How am I going to reflect on my mom? And even till last night, I didn't have anything written out, and I really don't. I'm just going to share some thoughts on what made my mom the person that she was and what it meant to me and the impact on my life. So, yeah. So, how to describe my mom? I put it into 3 categories. Again, project management. She was resilient, she was tough, and she was driven. As Rabbi Tillman said, I think product of her environment, for sure. I mean, the evacuation when she was 6 years old with my mom, my grandma, and at that point my aunt, who was just born, so she was a baby. So that was tough. When they returned to St. Petersburg, my mom, so intelligent and did so well in school, but when you're in Russia back then, when you're Jewish, you don't get the acknowledgement. You don't, they used to give out these medals when you did well in school, and a gold medal when you finished first, silver medal, and my mom had done well and had just earned her gold medal, and they wouldn't give it to her. So, things, I think experiences like that build your character and you could either become stronger than persevere through that, or you can go the opposite way. My mom was strong, right? Then immigrating to the US, not speaking any English, but she went to school, she picked it up, she went to work. I mean, she learned. And I remember her being so happy when one day in the morning she said, "I had my first dream in English." And she was just like thrilled with that. I'm not sure how many more there were, but that meant she really did, feel comfortable speaking English, which was great. When I was in high school, she had to have neurosurgery to clip a potential aneurysm. I mean, that was hard on her, hard on me, seeing her like that. My dad, it was the first time I remember seeing him really cry. But again, she recovered, and she was strong, and she continued, right, with life. My mom's only sister, my aunt, passed away the year that Hannah was born. It was her best friend. Then my dad followed in 2015, but, still, my mom being strong, persevered. And we're so happy just to have her with us for, the last 10 years of her life, so she could be close to me, close to Hannah. So that was wonderful. But yeah, she was definitely strong in spirit. Some would say at times not the easiest person to be around, but I think, she stood her ground. She knew who she was. She knew what she believed in, and that's what she stood for, which I think is sometimes difficult to do. So I really admire that in her, and oftentimes wish I could be more like her. So it's a work in progress for sure. She was also incredibly loving and selfless and kind, and had a great sense of humor. We were a small family. When we moved here, it was my mom, my dad, myself, and her sister. And she always did, everything for us. And food definitely was her love language. It was interesting, some of the feedback I got from friends from even high school that said that I haven't spoken to in over 30 years. The one thing I remember about your mom is she always wanted to feed me. So yes, definitely love language. And even Tom will say she wanted to feed me even when I said no. And she said, yes. Would want to give more food. I remember she was so funny. When we were in college, my good friend Nicole and I were sitting, and she taught us how to flirt. with boys. And I will never forget this. And I see Michelle is laughing. Yeah, that you look down to the side and on the object of your affection. I never forgot that. And I was really surprised that my mom was teaching me this, but it was great. When I was in high school, I did well academically, but there was physics. Physics was my nemesis, and I was not doing well in physics, and I wanted to drop physics, and I went to the guidance counselor, and I said, I want to drop physics, and he said, you can't do that you can, but your parent will have to approve. Well, here comes my mom. Absolutely not. You are not dropping physics. I said, but I am failing. This will take my GPA down. This is not a great thing. She said, we are not quitters. You will not quit. Even if you end up with an F or if you fail, but you are not dropping this class. I think I ended up with a C- or a D+, but I finished the class. So again, my mom was not a quitter, and she didn't want me to be, which at that point, I was not quite pleased with her, but I see now that that's a great quality to go through life with. You don't quit. She was always, I was her baby. And I remember when I was in high school and I got pneumonia and my fever would not go down. She sat with me all night, despite herself not feeling well. Those who know my mom well know she suffered from debilitating headaches her entire life. But it didn't matter how she was feeling. She sat with me. She wrapped my ankles and my wrists in water with vinegar, to old school way of getting fever down. Then we went to the hospital in the morning, and she just fought for me to be seen as quickly as possible. And, that's just the type of mom she was. It was just an amazing, amazing mom. And then also she was really intelligent and super curious and just a lifelong learner. Always loved traveling and, yes, learning about new cultures. My love of music, all sorts, classical music, all sorts of music, opera, theater, art museums. We used to go, when I was 12, she started taking me to all these places and instilled that love in me. So now I take Hannah with me to hopefully instill that love in her. And my mom was just so happy when Hannah was born. I remember telling her and my dad that, I was pregnant. And she said to me, "This is wonderful. I didn't think it was going to happen." Because I was older, and yeah, she had given up on that idea, but, and when Hannah was born, I think it's just the most wonderful thing in both of my parents' lives. It just made her so happy, and she was she was just thrilled to spend 10 years with Hannah and to know Hannah. And I think some of the pictures that we have on the memory boards reflect her connection and her love of Hannah. So I'll stop there. I will miss my mom like crazy, because there's no one like your mama. But she will live on here and there with me. So, this is a day of remembering the person that she was. She was a great person. I know her book of life was full. She gave of herself. She enjoyed life. She was, she lived a really good, full life. So. And Hannah, I'm sorry, can you go and get my phone so I can read one at Nicole? My good friend Nicole, who is in Europe right now, couldn't be with us, but she wanted to share a few thoughts about my mom, and then, so I want to be sure to do that. Thank you, love. Okay. Words of remembrance from Mrs. Tsymbalov, from Nicole. What I remember most about Mrs. Tsymbalov were her twinkling eyes, bright smile, kindness, and sharp wit. It was the combination of all of these qualities that was the most compelling part of being in Mrs. Tsymbalov's presence. When Mrs. Tsymbalov would greet me, her bright smile and eyes always made me feel special. She was always interested in what Sarah and I were up to, and always ready to give us sagely advice to us young girls, usually with a bit of sharp-witted humor. It is hard to put into words what someone means to you, all the small but special moments they add to your life. Those pieces of kindness and joy become a part of you, and never forget the person who gave them so freely.
Friends, Sarah suggested that I would afford an opportunity to any of you who would like to share a few thoughts about Sofia and come up here. No pressure, but I'll make a pause and see if anyone wishes to. Today is the day when we are here to say farewell to Sofia. Following our tradition, we say Lechi b'shalom, which means go forth in peace. Her time has come, the Almighty One has summoned her, and now she is in heaven with Ilya, with Raya, and they all together petition the Almighty One on our behalf, because this is what we believe in the Jewish tradition. Our departed loved ones petition God in heaven, so here on earth we would live well, and we would live the right way and meaningfully. And here on earth, Sofia will always continue to live in our hearts, our minds. She will continue to live through the book of life that she has written for us and is leaving us as her legacy. So may Sofia's memory be a blessing upon all of us. Let us honor Sofia's memory with a moment of silence. Please rise, and the memorial prayers will follow. אל מלא רחמים שוכם במרומים, אמצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים ותורים כזער הרקיעים מזהירים. את נשמת סופיה שלחה לעולמה, בעל הרחמים יסתרק בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. בצור החיים את נשמתה, אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן. God full of mercy, who dwells in the heights, provide a sure rest upon the divine presence's wings within the range of the holy, pure, and glorious, who shine and resemble the skies, to the soul of our beloved Sofia. The Master of mercy will protect her forever and will bind your soul in the bond of everlasting life. God is your inheritance. May she rest in peace. Let us all say Amen. And finally, my dear friends, we shall say Kaddish. As you all know, we always say Kaddish when we commemorate our loved ones. Kaddish, I must say, is not about death. Kaddish is a hymn of praise to God, and therefore it is a hymn of praise to life itself. And so today we shall honor Sofia's life, we shall honor the book of her life with the sacred words of our ancient prayer. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei rabba, bi'alma divrach rutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'hayachonu v'yom mechonu v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen, yeshmei rabba mevorach le'olam u'l'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnasi, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal, shmei gudsha brechu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata, da'amiran bi'alma v'yimru amen. יש להם רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort all the bereaved among us. Amen. You may be seated, my dear friends, and Mr. Bill Rubin will now inform you of further proceedings.
Friends, everyone is invited to a gathering. It'll be across the lobby. I'm going to ask everyone just to stay in the room for just a few minutes, and we'll let the family go through the family room, and they'll be the first ones inside, and then everyone will have a opportunity for a bit of repast and also to bring greetings to the family. So I'm going to invite the family first. I'm going to ask everyone to please rise. I'll be back in